Hello, world. You're listening to Eleanor Wagner's Strange and Scary World, here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, where we're always creeping it real. I'm your host, Eleanor Wagner.
On January 11th, 1966, around 6:30 p.m., police radios were dinging with reports of a glowing light over the Wanaque Reservoir. Residents in the surrounding area claimed it was a flying saucer. The light was seen and observed by many. Back in 2019, meteorologist Nick Stefano phoned me up about it, explaining it was a well-documented incident, and Nick wanted to refer me to his friend, a former Paterson police officer who was there on that day. He actually interviewed him on his own radio show, and the number of listeners tuning in was astounding. That officer, I'm excited to say, Nick Frasche, is today's guest. Welcome, Nick. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Before we begin, I arranged for a little surprise for you. I spoke with Nick Stefano over the weekend, and I asked for him to join us on today's conversation since you were originally his guest first.
Oh, okay.
So,
Right.
Nick Stefano, say hello to your longtime friend, Nick Frasche.
Hello, Nick.
How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing all right. Look at that.
Hi, Nick. How you doing? Thanks for tuning in.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was wonderful when we had him on the radio show. I mean, it's quite a story. Wait till people hear this one. You're getting it from first hand approach. This is the second hand or something you read. This man was right there.
It's really amazing. Back in those days, if you said something about this here, that's the reason why I kept everything quiet, because I was up from lieutenant, and I said, that's all they're going to hear. They're saying, we ain't making this guy. He's a nut, you know?
Yeah.
Now today, look at everything being released.
Exactly.
Did I tell you about my friend Vinny? So Vinny, who's a teacher, he lives in Paterson, is a teacher. He has the original articles written on the Wanaque Reservoir, and there are some pictures, apparently, of the hole in the ice in a magazine. So I told him to please get them for me. Vinny's going to come with us when Nick does come up here, and we take a ride to the Wanaque Reservoir, which would be kind of cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow, he has original newspaper clippings, huh?
There was an article written in a UFO magazine or something with a photo of the ice.
That might have been what I was speaking to when I said that they was an anonymous person who had sent in their photo that they had taken because they didn't turn in their camera that night. And It was said that it was anonymous, but it was believed to have been one of the police officers. Now, we know it wasn't Nick and we know it wasn't his friend, but there was another police officer that was at the scene that supposedly was the one that took the photograph and sent it in. And so then it was revealed later that it was him that sent the picture in, but there was also one sent in by this man called Claude Quattant, and he's since passed away, but that was posted in a magazine for UFOs. So that might be the one that you're talking about.
The flying saucer with the beam shooting down. It was kind of a hokey picture. It wasn't like, that's not clear to me.
Think about when it was taken, though. We're talking the 60s. The technology on ours wasn't that great. So this is a random person who had his camera out, whipped it out to take a picture.
Yep, I know.
Wanaque patrolman Joe Sisko was on duty at the time of the said sighting. And when he pulled into the sand pit, he came in contact with a huge pulsating light that changed from white to red, hovering soundlessly in the air. He said later it darted up and down and side to side, and his patrol car radio went crazy. Wanaque's mayor, Harry T. Wolf, was with his son and two other men when they saw it, and they described it as an oval-shaped object. Civil Defense Director Bentley Sensor and reservoir employee Fred Steins rushed to the top of the dam and found what they described as a bolt of light shooting down on the iced-over reservoir. It appeared to be burning a hole in the 12-inch thick ice of the dam. The object hovered for about a half hour and then flew out of sight. Military showed up shortly thereafter. Did you happen to know Officer Sisko, Nick?
Yeah, I knew him in passing because we used to have a shooting league and we would shoot against all the different towns around, a pistol league. So I knew him in passing. I wasn't good friends or anything with him, but I knew him in passing to say hello to or whatever on the range. I did not speak to him about this incident.
No, you didn't.
That night, no.
Nick Stefano, how did you hear about the story that you got in touch with Nick?
I remember all the hype in the papers, and always had attention to like supernatural UFOs and things like that. And I forget how we got on the subject, but Nick used to be the building inspector up in Wandage. That's how I became friends with him. And of course, he's in Florida now, but I don't recall how we started, but it did. And I can't believe this. It's wonderful.
Do you recall how you guys met, Nick Frasche?
Yeah, well, Nick and I used to talk a lot in the municipal building, but he used to come in and talk about putting a weather station in and everything there. And I don't know how exactly we got on the subject, but I told him, the story, and I said, it don't matter now, I'm retired, so they can't do nothing to me. But yeah, to make a little bit of a correction, those guys never saw the hole in the ice until the following morning.
Okay.
What happened is they went up to the top of there's an earthen dam. They went up to the top and they were looking. They couldn't really see nothing. And I asked Mike Perna, Mike, can we take a ride onto the reservoir itself? And he said, yeah. I said, I'd like to go where the light was shining down. So he took me up there. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but then it was about 6-7 inches of snow down on the ground. We drove out onto the lake or onto the reservoir itself. And I asked him, let me know when we're on the water. He goes, oh, we already are. I says, oh, okay. And you could see the lights from where the headquarters were by the dam. So we headed towards that, and he had his high beams on. And when we looked out, you could see a big black circle, big black spot. And I'm thinking that's water. It's thin ice. And he said, no, Nick, that's not thin ice. He said, this thing is 12 inches thick. I said, really? He goes, yeah. I said, well, stop the patrol car. And Al Capana from my department was there. And we were both sergeants. And we got out of the patrol car and we walked toward this black hole, which once we got close, we saw what it was. It was an opening in the ice that was probably 35 feet in diameter. And it was like an oval shape. But you could clearly see where this ice was cut out. It was as smooth as could be. And the snow was right up to the edge. Like nobody walked around the area. You could see no footprints. And I took pictures with this Kodak, I think they call it a pony camera. It's a slide camera, 35 millimeter slide. Well, we always carried them with us in case an accident or something, we would take pictures. So I had it in my vest pocket in my leather jacket. I get out and I started taking pictures. And then Mike Pernick started calling us. He says, hey, headquarters wants you to come back here. I said, okay. We walked back to the patrol car and drove back down. Well, now the Air Force was there.
I wanted to just mention to the listening audience, back then, it was common for residents to have their own police scanners used mostly for entertainment purposes. But that night, it put people in a frenzy. Phones at the station started lighting up maddeningly with calls from people saying that they saw this strange object in the sky above the reservoir. And these scanners began relaying the information, bringing thousands of people to congregate at the entrance of the reservoir to catch a glimpse of this object and try and learn more about it. And you yourself heard it broadcast on your own AM/FM radio. You had gone in for the night shift to relieve your coworker, Al Campana, who decided to stay on and travel with you over to the site, correct?
That's correct, yep.
And when you arrived, it was jam-packed.
There had to be 400 or 500 people there, and what they did is they took them all down to the school. We didn't go to the school. We stayed there. And Chuck Theodora was on the desk. He was the radio master on the desk, and he told us to come up to the top of the hill, which we did. We drove up, and everybody else went down to the school with the Air Force guy. And then he asked everybody for their cameras. If they had cameras, they said, yeah. He says, give me your cameras. We're going to develop the film and make sure that nobody touches the film, and we'll return the cameras to you. And they were putting labels on the cameras. And when we got back from going and looking, seeing the hole in the ice, this guy, and I forgot what his name when he was a captain, he said, did you guys take any pictures? And I said, yeah. I says, I got pictures in my Kodak camera. He said, would you please let me have that camera? Well, I'll develop it. And he said, then I'll return the camera to you. And I said, okay. I said, just mail it in to the West Paterson Police Department. And I gave him the address and everything. And I wanted to get my name, so I just gave him the address. It's just that they'll know who it's from. And I never got the camera back. In fact, I asked him if you develop them, there's some pictures on here of an accident. Just before I come on duty, they had taken a couple of pictures of an accident. I said, we need those pictures. Oh, yeah. He said, we'll return them to you. Never heard of him anymore. Never got the camera. Never got the film. Next thing I know, I get a package in the mail from Dr. Heinlich.
Yes, I remember you mentioning. And you did say that there were no footprints, no imprint signs, no mobiles or vehicles or any equipment of any kind at the top of the dam. No floating ice pieces in the water either to indicate evidence of cutting or drilling as an explanation.
Nope.
And did you say that the edges were clean and smooth? I wonder where all that ice went, huh?
Yes. Yeah, the edge, it was like a cookie cutter went in there and took this piece out, and you could see how thick the ice was. You could see the shadow down into the water. And I searched with my light around. There wasn't an animal footprint, a human footprint. There was no footprints at all. And the snow was freshly falling like that day. 2 or 3 inches more fell that day or during that night. We got there was about 11, I think, quarter to 11, something like that. When we got there, there was no signs whatsoever of tracks. The following morning, the mayor and some other people went up there during the day, and they saw the hole in the ice. And I told Chuck Theodora, I said, look, there's a big hole in that ice up there, about 30 foot in diameter. He said, really? I said, yeah. And I said, right where you told me that the light was shining down, that's where we drove to. So
is it true that if you hadn't stopped the Jeep, you guys would have driven right into the water?
Oh yeah. If we didn't have our height, he had the high beams on so you could see out. And when you looked out, it looked like a wet spot. And that's why I said to him, stop. I said, there's thin ice here. He goes, no, it can't be. He says, we go out and test the ice to let the ice fishermen come out, let them know it's safe to fish. And he said, we dig it. He said, like 12 inches thick, he said. I said, oh, okay. But I wasn't taking a chance. I said, I'll get out and walk. You leave the car here and I'll walk up to the hole. And Al and I both walked up there. We could not believe our eyes.
Why do you speculate there was a hole in the ice? What do you think that they were trying to do?
I have no idea. He said that if the light shined down from this object, it shined down onto the reservoir itself. That's all they knew. Nobody knew what was on the other side until we drove there, and then we told them what it was.
Was there a couple of questions? Was it oval or circular?
It was oval. It wasn't like a circle. It was oval, like an egg shape.
Did the UFO melt the ice all the way through to make it water, or was it black ice?
No, that was perfectly clear.
Just water.
You could have went fishing there. It was perfectly clear. You could shine your light, and you could see down a couple of foot. And like I say, the ice is thick. And when you shine that light, you could see the ice going down to the water. You could see the bottom of that ice.
Don't forget, Patrolman Joe Cisco did not turn in his camera, and the photograph that he took of the UFO was later confiscated by military personnel. But many who had cameras did not show up at that meeting at the school that night and didn't turn in their cameras. And
right.
Eventually, a photograph was turned into researcher August Robert, who submitted it as evidence to Dell's October 1967 publication on flying saucers as an anonymous submission from a Ringwood, New Jersey police officer. And so it was speculated to be the now deceased Sergeant Ben Thompson, who was a colleague of Chuck's. In 2017, a Daily Voice article by Jerry DeMarco finally identified, now 50 years later, of course, that the photographer put perhaps the most famous photo of the UFO over that Wanaque Reservoir as Claude Coutanche, who passed away in 1986. So clearly there was something strange that was unfamiliar to all these people, and they were taking photographs and not everyone turned in their camera.
Yeah.
And they were doing something with lasers.
So, Nick Stefano, you think that the unidentified flying object was a military object that was possibly doing some sort of an experiment?
Well, first of all, I want the listeners to know I am not a disbeliever, okay? I have a convincer strategy, and that is this. It has to be clear in evidence. You know, if we were in a court of law, there can't be a scintilla of doubt. You follow? That's why some photos I see of ghosts or UFOs, I'm like, are you going to bet the farm on it? No, you're not going to bet the farm on it. So that's not reality. But
well, I imagine that they would have seen it also. You know how planes were flying at the time and those indicators would show up if something like that were coming through. I'm sure that if something unidentified came up, they would have gotten, aside from the numerous calls, they would have gotten calls from the air or maybe even the military saying something unidentified is flying over the reservoir. And maybe that's what made them go out there, because everything would come together with all the calls that they were getting at the police station itself. Now, Chuck himself would claim the unidentified flying object was able to change shape, morphing from a white globe into a cigar-shaped vehicle. So our technology back in the 60s was definitely not of that rank.
And don't forget, Picatinny Arsenal is up in that area. They have radar, and they would have tracked it also. Picatinny Arsenal is off of 15 up there. They have radar there. I mean, they would have tracked it also.
And that would explain how they got there that quickly, too, Nick Stefano.
Well, I'm thinking as I take both sides of the equation. Okay, so let's see. Picatinny Arsenal, as the crow flies, is not that far, okay? That's a military base.
Right.
The military shows up in a short period of time. So I'm putting putting two and two together. I don't know. That could be a possibility. But I'll tell you what, of all the witnesses and what Nick described, it's pretty substantial, that evidence. I mean, that's impressive. I mean, here's a guy who I know and trust. I mean, and it wasn't like he was 150 feet away. He literally parked and walked on the ice up to the area looking down in the water where it was, the ice was melted. That's impressive. So
it really is. And he curses the day that he get handed in that camera to the military guy because he never got it back.
He wanted promotion too, which I understand. You have to remember too, Wanaque back then was really the backwoods. I mean, I remember growing up in Paterson, even West Milford, going to my uncle's house was sort of the backwoods. So way up in Wanaque, I mean, it really was isolated. In fact, I spoke to one of the gentlemen that he was with a couple of years ago when I had him on the radio, and he was telling me they used to shoot wild dogs up there. Dogs were coyotes, but they were dogs, and they would shoot them. So
I'm an animal lover. I don't like that.
Me too. You know, we're seeing things in the sky, but we don't know what's out there militarily. It's top secret. For instance, my friend told me he worked for Microsoft, said in the future, you're going to have a device is my cell phone, that you're going to be able to do everything on it, from video to talking to text to emails. I'm like, yeah, okay. Guess what? I'm on this phone 99% of the time. You're on my iPad now, but 99% of the time I do everything from my phone. Scary. So I was at the Sussex County Air Show, which they used to have every year. I used to love it. And we were down there, and they're playing the national anthem before it starts. And out of the corner of my eye, I see this black thing. Just at the corner of my eye. I'm not really paying attention. And it's getting closer. All of a sudden, I look. I don't hear a sound. This thing zoomed over us at a rate I've never seen in my life. The announcer goes, that was the stealth bomber. And like 10 seconds later, he says, it is now over the Atlantic Ocean. So I'm like, oh my God. Now, here's the point is this. The stealth bomber is early 60s technology, okay? It's not brand. So if that thing can do that in such a crazy, I'm like, anything's possible. So who knows?
Very true.
Yeah. I heard it on my AM/FM radio. They didn't say that much. It just said lights have been seen in the sky. But this happened before, too. This happened earlier in October that they had lights up in that area, too, because Chuck Theodore told me about it. He said, yeah, they had lights before shooting across the sky. So the people weren't excited or upset. They just wanted to see what was going on.
I'm not exactly sure what the connection is between UFOs and water, but there was also a case in Lake Owassa in Sussex County back further than the 60s. I think it was in the 50s, where a UFO crashed in Lake Owassa.
That story is in book 1, too. Actually, I learned about that story from the niece of the gentleman who grew up on that farm when the incident occurred. She wanted to tell his story because he went to his grave trying to tell the world about what happened to him because his family had been shut up by the military. They didn't want anyone to talk about it from the farm.
And the family saw the whole thing happened. And before you knew it, the military was coming in.
Literally swept in, took whatever it was out of the lake and disappeared and told the family they had to be quiet about it. But the man, her uncle, obviously was a young kid when it happened, was talking about it his entire life and told his entire family the whole story. And so she wanted to tell his story. And that's how I wrote about it in the book.
That's real interesting.
I mean, my first thought is I'm saying, well, what is the thing that is most prevalent in the human life is water? Well, maybe they're taking water on, or maybe they're sampling the water or something like that.
Or maybe they have something hidden in the water. I mean, if they're so evasive as it is, maybe they're able to put something in the water that we can't see or detect. And then they go back periodically to take it out for whatever reason or do something to it. Who even knows? But there seems to be some kind of a connection between the UFOs and water in a lot of instances.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And there was a common link between the first sightings of Bigfoot around the time that the UFO crashed in Lake Owassa. It crashed in Lake Owassa, and shortly thereafter, people started seeing Bigfoot sightings. And so a lot of people were speculating whether or not these Bigfoot came off of that UFO.
What year was that one again? Do you know?
I want to say 50s.
Yeah, that was really desolate up there then, really isolated.
Yeah.
No, it's all interesting stuff, and it always fascinated me. But again, I always ran into a lot of dead ends, to be honest. And you know how I am. I'm more skeptic. I'm like, wait, come on. You gotta have better proof than that. Not some blurry image, you know. You got cameras now that are 10 megapixels, you know, on your iPhone. Get something that, or even you would think these trail cams would pick up stuff.
And you know how you talk about, well, Nick was there, and so you believe him. Well, this woman's uncle was there and saw them take this thing out of the lake and put it on their military trucks and drive out of his yard with it. So she believes her uncle because he was there. He saw it happen. He was told to be quiet about it. I interviewed her for the first book because she was sharing her uncle's story with me. So it's similar to how you trust Nick. She was going to trust her uncle. And he, like she said, went to his dying day trying to tell the world about what happened to him.
Well, then the issue is, was it military? Maybe the military's doing experiments. I don't know.
Right. We don't know that.
And what if, somebody says, guess what? That was military and here's the proof. Okay. But it's still fascinating, especially how they hide stuff. We know people weren't seeing things because now they're releasing some evidence. Okay. You can't explain it. So that's a good thing. Not everybody's a crackpot. Crazy stories, but not everybody is losing their mind.
2 weeks after the incident, you got that package arrive at the precinct addressed to you from Dr. Joseph Allen Hynek. And he's the well-renowned scientific consultant of Project Blue Book, which is one of the series of systematic studies of UFOs conducted by the U.S. Air Force, which was made into a television program not too long ago based on Dr. Hynek's journals revealing the true fact behind all of the debunked cases, because obviously he was hired and instructed to debunk these cases along with the military man. Right. And he kept a separate journal, which in it he wrote all about the actual true facts of what he was debunking. And they've recently made that into a program. The package was marked confidential and contained forms for you to fill out and mail back to him. What were those forms?
It was like maybe 100 questions on there about the shape, about odor, about light, about sensitivity. How did you feel when you were in the presence of the object, which I wasn't there when the object was there.
Right.
Did you have any sensations? There was 100 questions. And I also did is I penned a personal note and attached it to it and asked them about my camera and the film. And of course, like I said, I never got any response back about that. The questionnaire that I filled out, I never made copies or nothing of it. I just put it back in an envelope and mailed it back. They had a self-addressed envelope included. I put it in that and I just mailed it back to them. And that was the last. I never got a phone call. Never got anything.
I'm sure you're regretful since you never saw that camera again. It was the only physical evidence you had, right?
It was stupid. It was stupid because you got to remember something. Back in them days, people trusted the military. They trusted police. And so when they asked you, hey, do you have the camera? Yes, we'll get it. We'll get it back to you. We'll get this back to you. You feel okay. Yeah, don't get it back to me, but never did. And I'm quite sure. And I said the same thing to Al that night. I says, Al, I should have never gave him that camera because I'll bet you there's people that went to that meeting and people that didn't go to that meeting that took pictures because there was hundreds of people, hundreds. It looked like there was a sale going on. How many cars were going up and down? I think it was Paterson Avenue was the main drag. And we had all to do to get through. We put the lights on and that and got around them to go up the driveway, to go up to the top of where the state house is right below the dam. And so that's where we drove up to that point. And then he said, look, we put barricades up. We're going to try and stop people from coming up here. And so they already had the barricades up. I guess the road department or something put I didn't have to worry about putting no barricades up. And when we drove out, we drove around the barricades and went up Paterson Ave and went all the way around and came in off of another road to get to the top level. And there's big fences up. He had to open the fence and drive through to get on to the reservoir itself. So I don't know. It's very mysterious. I'll tell you the truth. I would have never believed this no matter what. And I said to Al, because Al and I both had taken the exam for lieutenant, I said to Al on the way back, Al, this never happened. I said, because you know what is going to happen. They'll ridicule us. We'll never get promoted. I said, and he goes, yeah, you're right. And we never talked about it. We talked about it with our chief. And he said the same thing. He says, all right, just let it go. So,
oh my goodness. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy, but you got to remember, this is 50 years ago. So when you're thinking about something like this here back in them days, you had a different mindset than the people today would have. Today they would tell them, nah, the hell would you? But back then they would have ridiculed you. And
just recently in the last administration, President Trump revealed to the world that UFOs exist. He actually released a lot of the paperwork that's available for you to read if you really wanted to. So I'm excited about that because I think it's about time.
Well, it is. And I think that maybe back then it's a different story, but I'm saying today, I don't believe our people would be upset because look, if they wanted to harm us, their technology is 100 years ahead of us. So they could have harmed us anytime they want. Either they're studying us or they're whatever it may be, studying our lifestyle or studying our species, whatever, who knows? But I have no content. I don't fear anything because I said if they wanted to hurt you, they'd already done it.
I definitely don't think that there would be a reenactment of what happened with Orson Welles when he caused the whole War of the Worlds radio release and people went crazy and took of their lives. They thought we were being taken over by aliens. I don't believe that that would happen as far as UFOs are concerned. People might lose their mind for other things, but I don't think they would lose it over UFOs.
No, that Orson Welles thing was unbelievable. I remember my mother listening to the radio, calling my father, telling him, Nick, something's going on. My father, he said, you're crazy. But back then, the people didn't have television. We had the radio, primarily a radio. Television had 2 channels, maybe.
Right.
Well, the UFO phenomenon started then, and people were literally scared. I mean, nobody had a TV, and you're listening to this guy, and it's scary. If you don't know any better, it's scary, and people literally killed themselves.
I think today, the people would take it in stride. They may be concerned, but I think they would take it in stride. I think they'd have more questions about it, more so wanting to know why and what are we doing about it, and why are you hiding all this stuff? And it's true. Why are you hiding it? I went out to New Mexico and I went to the museum out there and I was reading all the letters and stuff that they had in the museum.
Oh, that's right. You and your wife of 61 years visited Roswell, New Mexico in 2011.
61.
Congratulations. That's a wonderful milestone. For the listening audience who may not know, it is claimed a U.S. Army Air Force balloon crashed on a Roswell ranch in 1947. Many people believe it to be an alien spaceship. It is said that the bodies of aliens were taken from this crash. And you did try to visit the actual original site, correct?
Yeah, they had it fenced off. Nobody was allowed to go. You only can go so far. And from what I was told at the museum, there's some college, I guess the University of New Mexico, they allow certain amount of students to go out and excavate different areas looking for bones and looking for different things, but nobody else is allowed in that area at all and never had and haven't been. So it's all fenced off. So why would you do that? Why would you fence off a big area like that?
I think because the public would be scared. This is scary technology, what's out there. But they are releasing videos now, which are pretty impressive. And you can't call everyone a liar. Sure, a lot of people have made mistakes in what they've actually seen, but I got to tell you, there's too much evidence out there that they exist. And a friend of mine, Charlie, who moved from West Milford to Florida, his father and mother-in-law are Russian. They live in Russia. His father-in-law was in the military in Russia, and he concurred that, in fact, they have seen UFOs. So he admitted, too, that they're real. He's not an American. He's a Russian. Talk to any good legitimate pilot. Why would they lie?
I'm sure they see them all the time.
Yeah. Now, UFO simply means unidentified. I can throw a rock across the way and you see it flying and we don't know what it is. Is it something from space? Who knows? I mean, recently I visited the site of the Betty and Barney Hill event that occurred in 1961, almost 60 years to the day. I read that book in high school, and what they said under hypnosis is kind of scary. I don't think you can make this up.
Do you recall what they said?
Well, they were driving home from Canada. This is up in New Hampshire now. So back in 61, it was really isolated. And they saw this light in the sky, and it was getting closer and bigger. And the next thing they remembered before hypnosis was they were 35 miles down the road, 2 hours missing in their time. And he had scuffs on his shoes. Her dress was torn in different places. But under hypnosis, they mentioned a lot of detail. So it's very famous. He was black, she was white, and it wasn't popular back then to be biracial. Interesting story. The state put the plaque up. It wasn't UFO people. It was the state of New Hampshire identified this location.
Ultimately, they were abducted, is what the story.
Correct. Yes.
Out.
These tests went on them, and then they were released. And but if you listen to the audio, they recorded hypnotic sessions, and it's scary when you just listen to their voices. You can hear the fear in their voice.
What do you think made them go for hypnosis? What prompted that?
I think it was suggested to them, no pun intended, but it was suggested for them to go under hypnotic trance by some. The gentleman who did the session was very famous, so he wasn't some local person. He was a very famous person who did this kind of work. So,
have you ever had your own experiences with unidentified flying objects?
Probably. The scariest thing I think I've ever seen was as a kid. Growing up in Paterson, I was playing ball with a friend of mine, and I happened to look up, and this huge flying, it was a meteor at the time, huge, went across the sky. The next day it was in the paper. It landed in Canada. This was back in the 60s. That scared the daylights out of me. But as far as really seeing a UFO that I'm not sure of, no, I can't say that I really have. I've seen weird lights when I did work for the National Weather Service up in northern Maine. I mean, pitch black. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face at night, literally. I remember looking at the sky and seeing lights I've never seen before. I was told that some of them are actually satellites. You're seeing stars between stars between stars that you've never seen. You know, I know that star, but when you see dozens and dozens of stars between them, it was beautiful. Of course, I saw the northern lights up there too one time, which sort of scared me, but it was beautiful. I'm glad I experienced it. Yeah.
When we moved into the development where we live now in 2001, we were one of the first homes in the development. There was only one other here on the cul-de-sac that was the model home, but they had a couple that was living in it already, and none of the other houses were up. And I remember one day, and it was the middle of the day, the kids were out. Cassidy was in preschool, Tori was in the first grade, and I just happened to be on the phone with somebody who was looking out the window and see this strange object across the horizon over towards High Point State Park, hovering in the air, you know, moving back and forth in an odd manner, but hovering in the air. And I'm thinking, nah, this can't be. It's the middle of the day. First of all, am I really seeing something that's so strange? So I said to whoever I was talking on the phone, I got to go. I got to call my neighbor real quick. And so I hung up with her and I ended up calling the woman next door, Sue. And I said, Sue, look outside your window real quick, and your front window, and look out towards High Point State Park and tell me if you see anything. And she was real quiet and comes back and she says, I see something, but I don't know how to explain what I see. And so the two of us are there on the phone talking about this thing that we see for a couple of minutes before it just disappeared. Was it something that I could talk about as being an unidentified flying object? Yeah, it was, but I don't know what it was. So it was unexplainable. But not too long after that, my kids were outside in the pool in the backyard night swimming. It was Cassidy and Tori, and they had their friend Brandon over. And you know, when you're a kid, night swimming was the thing to do. You loved it. So they were having a blast outside. I was inside. Next thing I know, all three of them are running in the house, soaking wet. Mommy, oh my God, we just saw a flying saucer. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Come on. We just saw a flying saucer. So they dragged me out to the back where the pool is. And obviously there's nothing there anymore. It's gone. And they're just, all three of them are babbling a mile a minute. I'm saying, wait a second. Slow down. I'm going to figure something out. I'm going to give each of you a piece of paper and some writing tools and put you separate areas around the house. And you're going to each draw a picture of what it is that you saw. And let's see what you come up with. And each of them drew exactly the same thing. I actually kept the pictures and I posted them in the book. One, Sussex County Hauntings and Other Strange Phenomena. I have it in the book because they were so similar in their drawings that it was, to me, not a coincidence, really, that they were drawing exactly the same thing. I mean, down to the lights around the center. I mean, it was just, you know, everyone's going to have this picture in their head about what they're going to draw as far as the flying saucer is concerned, but they drew the same thing. So did they see something? They were convinced they did. To this day, they swear they did.
But that's interesting. I might have heard this story about High Point at one time.
Do either of you gentlemen know when that whole Orson Welles thing took place on the radio? What was it, the 50s, 40s, 30s? I have no idea.
When was it?
October 30th, 1938, The War of the Worlds, radio drama.
The only reason why I'm asking is because I'm speculating as to whether that was the cause of the military withholding information because there was such a frenzy that people freaked out. Was that the reason maybe they weren't going to tell us about these sightings because they thought that if that happened with that incident and it wasn't even real, maybe that's why they wouldn't tell us? Like you, I have no understanding as to why they would keep that from the public.
It boggles the mind that I can see me keeping some things a secret, but I mean, eventually, you know, there's nothing that you can keep a secret for the rest of your life. Somebody's going to say something at some time. I was not a UFO buff. I never was. I always liked to gather information. I like to research stuff, but I was never a UFO buff. But I tell you, after that night, that was it.
And that kind of would make sense because the Roswell thing took place in 47 and your incident took place in the 60s. So it kind of makes sense that maybe that was the reason why the military withheld information for all those years because people lost it. They lost their minds. They lost their shit.
Yeah, that's true. I know I never heard the broadcast, but I remember my father telling me about my mother listening to that radio and she was going hysterical. And he's going, you're crazy. You know?
For all we know, they learned that technology from that crash at Roswell when they got that object. You never know. Amazing. Well, little did I know that interviewing you about the UFO experience wasn't the only story you had to share with me because you and I had spoken about that. And then a while later, you let me in that you were the building inspector in Sussex Wantage in 1993 until 2007. And during that time, you learned a thing or two about the Crescent Theater in Sussex on Main Street. For those in the listening audience, some back history on the theater. It was the first air-conditioned building in Sussex, New Jersey. The Jazz Singer, the first talkie show, was shown there in 1927. A year later, the theater was sold and became the Sussex Theater and was used for Sussex high school graduations until 1932, when the new school building was completed on the other side of town. Then it was used for local performances. The borough eventually purchased it, using it for a senior citizen center. It even became a provisional town hall in the mid-90s while the borough hall was being renovated. Structural issues forced the senior center to relocate in 2001. The borough then began leasing it to a nonprofit Tri-State Actors Theater a year later. Cornerstone acquired a long-term lease in 2011 and has been there ever since. And I'm working on getting in there with my paranormal team for an investigation because I knew that it was haunted, and then you told me it was as well. You said that the late night crew revealed some stories to you. What were they?
They said you used to hear music and singing coming up. I said, you guys are drinking too much, because there's a parking lot up in the back where the people, you can park your cars, and them guys used to sit up there, and they said you could hear music, hear singing. I said, in fact, I got the road department guy to go and open it up, and we went in. I said, let's go in and look. Maybe somebody's trying to live in here. And we went through the whole place, up and down and that, and there was nobody in there.
Did you know that there's actually a story about a young girl wearing a black dress being sighted dancing on the theater stage? Have you ever heard that before?
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
So I'm trying to get in there with my paranormal team because apparently there are other stories. And when I put it out there on social media for people to share the stories, some of them just don't want to, or people don't actually get onto that site and see the post to tell me. Sometimes it's word of mouth. But there are other stories out there. I just can never get them all at the same time for the one chapter, which makes it tough. So when I end up doing a recap or an update on a chapter later on. You also had an interesting tale that you shared with me that happened to your daughter, Josephine, when she lived in a mansion on Trinity Street in Newton, New Jersey. The building's no longer there, and it's since been replaced by a big apartment complex. But when she resided in the home, it was owned by a retired school teacher who split the building in two, and she lived on one side and your daughter was on the other. What was Josephine experiencing?
She saw an apparition during the night. She saw an apparition, and she said it was a white-haired woman was standing in the doorway. There was a set of stairs went up. There was a toilet upstairs, and then a bedroom on this side. Of course, the house was split in half and partitioned off. And my daughter was living on the right-hand side. And so I said, well, man, maybe you were having a dream and this and that and the other thing. And then she started telling me about the chimes were going off, and that she had a chime over the top of the sink, and that chime started ringing. I said, well, maybe it's the draft from the window. So I went and I got caulking, and I put caulking around the window and everything to make sure there was no draft of that. And then she told me the alarm went off during the night. They had an alarm downstairs, and the alarm went off. So I got the alarm, and I made it go off, and I kept shaking the alarm clock until it stopped tingling. I said, there ain't no way this goes off anymore. It's all completely unwound. Following day, she calls me and tells me the alarm went off again. So I went back over there, and she was so nervous about it, this and that. I ended up putting locks on all the first story windows, and I put a new lock on the front door, and she still was very upset over it. The woman came back again that night, standing in the hallway, telling her everything is going to be all right. She's telling my daughter everything's going to be all right. Whatever. I don't know what she meant, but so at that time, I used to go to St. James Church over there in Wanaque, and I went and see Father Gacklin, and I said, Father Gacklin, I hate to ask you this. I said, but you might think it's kind of foolish, but could you go to the house? I know you go down St. Joe's Hospital and visit the patients during the week. Could you stop at her house? She's on Trinity Street, right down the street from St. Joe's. Not St. Joe's, so Newton Memorial Hospital. So he said, yeah, sure. So he's out Wednesday night, 7:00. He goes down, stops at the house Wednesday night, and is talking with her, and he went around the house with the holy water. Believe it or not, the alarm went off while he was sprinkling the holy water. The alarm clock went off, and the chime started to ring, and he jumped out of his skin. He said, my God, I never would believe this. But after he blessed the house and everything, never had another thing happen there.
The landlord woman also saw the woman apparition as well, right?
Yeah, the woman that lived next door,
right?
She told my daughter the woman had died and left the house to her kids. So the kids were in ownership. So they rented out the side that the mother was living in, and she described her to her. her. She said she was a white-haired woman, short, stubby woman. She was a school teacher. And my daughter said, yeah, that's the one I saw. She said, standing in my doorway. And so it's a very, very, very odd situation. But Father Gacklin blessed the house, and that was it. It never happened. I tell you what, it's like a funny story. But she said, no, nothing happened anymore. She said, that's the end. They never had another thing. But she eventually moved out of the house, but she was just scared to stay there anymore.
Nick Stefano, you had a couple of things happen to you not too long ago with was it your aunt's radio station's music? And
my aunt died 2 years ago, and because of COVID and everything, we never had an official memorial or burial for her. Now, she wanted to be cremated, and I recorded her request, so nobody can say she didn't want that. And she wanted her ashes spread out in Paterson and buried with my grandmother and grandfather, her parents. So I get in my car, ready to go to my cousin's house, her son, who had the ashes. And I get in my car, and I put on the radio, and I said, boy, every time Aunt Marie was in the car, she always listened to the 40 station because she was older, and that was when she grew up. She knew all the songs. As a kid, she sang to them. I didn't know what station was the 40s on XM, so I had to Google it while I'm in my car. And XM 73 is 40s or big band music. Turn the selector to 73, and the song's playing. But on my display, it shows the name of the song, and then it scrolls through the artist. The name of the song, and I have it recorded video on my phone, is Marie. That was her name. I never heard that song in my life. I heard Ave Maria, Oh Marie, you name it. So that was one. The second thing that happened to me was with my dad, who passed away a year ago, May. He loved betting horses, $2, $3. I'd take him down, nothing crazy. And I'm watching a special on Secretariat, the documentary. And I remember watching that as a kid in 1973 when Secretariat won the Triple Crown. So I watched all three races, the Belmont, the Preakness, and the Kentucky Derby. That's what it takes. And he's so strong, I'm just thinking of him, and I'm getting emotional. And then I remember one of the last things he wanted to do was for me to take him to Monmouth Racetrack. But he couldn't. He was just, his legs were all swollen. He really couldn't go. So I said, let me just Google Monmouth Racetrack. Again, I don't really bet on horses. And just to see, if they're even running. So I go to Monmouth Racetrack site, and I said, let me look at the first race. The first race, one of the horses running was Stefano. That's our last name. Who names a horse Stefano? I said, no, I'm seeing things here. And I saved it on my phone too. Later on, I check out who wins the race. Stefano. July 3rd this year. Look at the first race, July 3rd, Monmouth Track. True story. Two things that happened to me. So I don't think that's a coincidence.
No coincidences. Well, that's how our deceased loved ones show that they're around us. They make those little things happen for us to make the connections if we're ready and willing to do that. Some people, it goes over their head.
There are no coincidences. Those are the soft nuances that they use to connect with us, to let them know that they are still with us and in our lives. And you just got to recognize that and accept it and know that it's not a coincidence, that this was something strange that happened to you, but it was meant to happen. And especially so since it was the anniversary of your Aunt Marie's death. And I do believe that happens to a lot of people a lot of the time. Some people just ignore it and overlook it and don't think anything about it. But sometimes they're just so obvious in your face, you can't deny it.
Look, just the song alone with my aunt. If I was 30 seconds slower or quick, I would have missed the thing. What's the chances of this? Come on. So, but then my dad, that really put me over the top. So I guess it was a confirmation. They're reaching out to me and
absolutely hit home.
Comforting, I got to say. It was emotional, but it was comforting. So that's what it did to me.
Did you take a moment out and go, Dad, thanks for doing that to me?
I always talk to Dad.
Good for you.
Has anything like that ever happened to you, Nick Frasche? Have you ever had any experiences yourself with deceased loved ones trying to make their presence known to you in little nuances that you know for certain, oh my goodness, that's them trying to let me know they're around all the time?
Now, my daughter, when we first moved up from Paterson to Wanaque, she was very unhappy. I had built a new home in Wanaque, and she didn't like it up there. She wanted to go back to Paterson. But during the night, my mother, my father, and I think it was my Uncle Louis appeared to her and said that they were going to fix it. They were going to take care of it and told her not to be upset. And the following day, my daughter got an offer to go to work for a place down in the Willow Mall. And my brother said that she can come and live with him, who lived in Totowa. And so kind of a coincidence that should all happen the following day.
Not a coincidence. She saw them. She saw them. They told her it was going to be okay.
And my daughter never met my mother. And she said the woman that was with Grandpa had on a black short jacket. She had her pocketbook over her arm, and she detailed what her hairstyle and everything was. And I went and got a picture of my mother and brought it out. It was my mother and father together. I brought it out, and she goes, "That's her." And she had never met my mother because my mother died in 58. Mm-hmm. But she knew my father, and she thought that the other person was my Uncle Louis, who also had passed away. So
Josephine is clearly very sensitive to spirit because...
No, she is. She is very sensitive. A lot of little things happen with her. And she don't tell anybody. She tells me because I don't make fun of her. But like I said, look, the strange things happen. You never know. You never know what's going to happen. But she has had that happen in Newton. And then what happened in Wanaque, we had just moved in the house and she had just moved up there and she was not happy there at all. And then she told me about it a couple of days later. She said, "You know what happened to me?" And then she explained. And I said, "I'll be a son of a gun." So she ended up living with my brother and going to work for them people. And she stayed there about 4 or 5 months or so. Used to come home weekends. And then finally, eventually, she got a job up in our area and then she stayed there. So
she got what she wanted anyway.
Yeah, I guess so. But very, very strange things.
I know that you said that she's afraid of certain things. Does she embrace it, or is she afraid of what people might say? That's why she speaks to you about it only? Or has she changed over the course of time? Does she not care?
No, she's more outspoken now than she was, because now she's 60 years old. So, but she's more outspoken now about things like that. She's very religious. I think that gives her a lot of strength. Her religion gives her a lot of strength. But she's right in tune with that. It's unbelievable how she just picks it right up on this stuff.
Do you know, was there anybody else in your family, maybe your mother or your grandmother or somebody else who was similar? Because a lot of the times it runs in the family. It'll maybe skip generation, or one child will have it and not another.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just she lost her brother. We lost our son. He was 15 at the time when we lost him. And she has seen him in her dream and spoke to him. But other than that, I don't know. She hasn't said recently anyway, she hasn't had anything happen.
They do say they come in dreams. That's predominantly how people will see loved ones in dreams. Although they do come in other ways, but that's most time how you can see them in a dream in one way or another.
Yeah, it just, have you ever had anybody get a phone call from somebody and you find out later on that they had died a couple of hours before?
Yes. Well, you know me, I write books about this sort of thing. So I have spoken to people who have received phone calls from deceased loved ones. Yes. Why do you ask?
Because it happened to me, and it was a friend of mine that I haven't seen in many years. And he called me, says, "Hey, I want to come up and see you." And I said, "Yes, I'll be around." And I had moved up to Wanaque at the time. And I said, "Yeah," I says, "I'll be around." I had a little store there in Wanaque. So I said, "Yeah, stop up." And later that night, his wife called me and said that he passed away. And I said, "When?" So she said, "Yesterday." And I said, "Really?" I just spoke to him yesterday. She said, "Well, when did you speak to him?" I said, "It was yesterday afternoon." I said, "It was like maybe 3 o'clock, something like that." She says, "Nick, he had a massive heart attack. He drove a truck. He was delivering an order in New York City. He had a massive heart attack right on the dock over here." She says, like about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm talking to him. I'm talking to this guy about 3 o'clock.
That's crazy.
I thought maybe at the time, I didn't want to say the word. And it was just a short phone call. So I want to come up and see you. And I said, "Yeah, I'll be around." His name was Nick Marilla.
I wonder if he ever came up to see you and you just didn't realize he was there.
I don't know. In fact, I touched base with his wife on Facebook a couple of years ago, and I never said nothing to her about it. But it's just something that's very strange. And I thought about this many, many times. And I said, "Yeah, he's reaching out to," and she had told me he had went around and saw a lot of his friends the day before. And he had told her that he was going to come up and he said, "I'm going to go up and see Nick Frasche." He said he opened up a deli up there in Wanaque. He said, "Go up and see him." And so she said, "Yeah, right, we'll take a ride this weekend." And he called me. And that very day, a couple of hours before, he had a massive heart attack.
My goodness. Has anything like that ever happened to you, Nick Stefano?
When I was a kid, I used to see, I didn't know what they were then, but I used to see shadow people. Just the corner of my eye, I would turn like I saw somebody there all the time in this house that we lived in. I'm like, what am I imagining things? I didn't really pay much attention to it. But then when I got older, you're reading about this stuff. I'm like, wait a minute, I saw the same thing. But we lived in an old house, very old house in Paterson. So that was real. But again, that's not UFOs. That's,
I'm sure that Nick Frasche is very thankful to make this connection with you on air.
Okay.
Well, I'm really glad that you were able to join us today, Nick Stefano. It was definitely a story to share, and thank you for connecting me with Nick Frasche. I appreciate that. Do you want to say your goodbyes, Nick Frasche? Nick Stefano says he's going to give you a call later. He's going to catch up with you.
Okay, very good.
And I want to thank you so much for sharing your time with me today, too. I know we already spoke in our original interview when I wrote the first book, Your Story in the UFO Chapter, but
Yes.
I thought it would be a really nice thing to be able to share it with the public who listen to podcasts.
Yes.
So thank you so much for coming on and sharing that story with me and the others.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
For those of you interested in learning more about the Lake Owassa incident we spoke about in today's episode, Nancy Bradley wrote a remarkable story about her Uncle Arnold's experience when that UFO crashed in the inlet on Lake Owassa in western Sussex County of New Jersey in July 1963. That story was squashed and swept under the rug as a missing Cessna aircraft, but many families who actually saw the craft when it went down believe it was no ordinary man-made structure. This was Nancy's way to honor the memory of her Uncle Arnold and keep his mission to reveal the truth going. I'm sure extraordinary stories like this make people question the legitimacy until they actually experience something similar themselves. Nick Frasche said he never would have believed had it not happened to him. If you'd like to hear more true life accounts, look up my Sussex County Hauntings and Other Strange Phenomena book. It was a pleasant surprise to add in discussions of the paranormal and those special visits from deceased loved ones. After all, loved ones visit us all the time, and in discussing them, we grasp the essence of those special heartfelt moments when a lost one visits after their departure from life. I love to hear these poignant tales. If you have one to share, email me at authoreleanorwagner@gmail.com. Furthermore, ghostly listeners, you can follow me on that website, authoreleanorwagner.com, where there are links to my books and video updates and photographs from all of my investigations. Sign up or level up on my Author Eleanor Wagner Patreon program now for special bonus opportunities available to its patrons, such as one-on-ones with me and co-hosting opportunities on an episode of Eleanor Wagner's Strange and Scary World podcast. And thank you, paranormal enthusiasts, for tuning in today. I hope you'll come back again. Remember to tap into your own gifts. Everyone has them. And in the meantime, make sure you're creeping it real.